Hey, welcome back to my channel. I'm building my RANS S21 outbound plane. The good news is I've been spending more time working on the plane and getting build hours in, and I'm moving along with the panel. So I've got some headway being made. I'd like to do a quick shout out to my local EAA chapter. We just finished our second Young Eagle event of the summer. And for those of you not familiar with Young Eagle events, it's where you bring a bunch of kids, usually ages 12 to 16, and you provide them an introductory flight. All the chapters do them a little bit differently. We do it at an air museum. We bring them in about 10 o'clock. They tour the museum. Then we give them a ground school, basic avionics, basic aeronautics, aviation, panels, just top level. We give them a logbook. The ground school instructor signs their logbook. And then we had 5 planes this time. We take them all up for an introductory flight and talk about the airplanes and the careers a little bit, get them excited about it. And the whole time we're serving lunches, hot dogs, hamburgers, sodas, etc. We had about 40 kids come through, 5 pilots, and boy, the excitement these kids have when they finish. So a fun event. I'm really glad it went well. In this episode of the build, we move ahead with the panel, lay out the shelf, get some avionics onto the shelf, lay out some of this wiring, get that figured out, and then I get my grounding system kind of figured out. So a fair amount of content, but with that, let's get into it. The next step that I've done is I've just unraveled all these cables. As you see, I've got them laying all over the place. Most of them are marked pretty well, so I know what a lot of those are. This is a lighting controller. I'll figure out how the lighting controller is going to work. And then you've got trim servo cabling, ELT cabling, mic push to talk, phones, music in, kind of just a whole mishmash of stuff all labeled. And from here, I guess I'm going to start putting the shelf up and determine what components are going to lay on the shelf. I have also fitted up this control panel. Right now I've got it set up with the 3 controls for throttle, prop, and mixture. I ordered my Titan as a constant speed. I am talking to RANS. I'm thinking about switching it to a ground adjustable, but there might be some problem with that from Titan. So I am right now just holding off drilling any additional holes because I may have to do the constant speed prop there. And I did put that bracket in. You can kind of see how I've got that plate attached, and that bracket goes up underneath the radio stack. So the radio stack, which is all attached, is supported now. And that's supported by, I don't have this attached yet, it's just laying up there. But that'll be part of attached to the frame up here. Okay, my next step was trying to figure out how the panel's hooked up. They didn't really give me an overall schematic, so I'm going to have to create my own. This is probably the second of 10 that I'll have to do to get this figured out. But this gives me a general idea. Starting at the battery, which is of course grounded to the frame, the battery goes to a master solenoid. When the ground is completed with the master switch, the ground is completed, that gets the solenoid active, sends over power to the starter solenoid. The starter solenoid then powers up this bus bar, which is behind each of the toggle switches. These are all breaker toggles. I forgot what the name is, but there's breakers within the toggle itself. So this bus bar lights up, or it doesn't light up, it powers up. At the same time, then you've got a jump that goes from this bus up to my circuit breakers. These are all connected on a bar. And then there's a jump that comes down and connects these. So when the master's turned on, I get power to a certain set of breakers and this line of toggle switches. Then when I turn my avionics master on, that completes this circuit. that goes up and then powers up the comms and the radios on these bars, and there's a jump here that connects these two. So that's the general schematic. At least gets me started, and now I know how things are at least attached to the panel. So I'm going to start laying out the panel shelf instruments and start running the wires back to the respective units and move on from there. A quick update: I had to install another toggle switch in my panel for the wig-wag. In my landing lights, I've got a wig-wag option, but it needs a second power source going back. So it's a 10 amp breaker toggle. I was hoping to get a 3-way where I would have off landing light wig-wag if I go all the way up, but they don't make it in a breaker. So I could have installed a breaker over here and then removed this breaker, but it just seemed easier to put a second power switch in. I'll label it and just wire that to the landing lights as the wig-wag. I installed a firewall pass-through. Although the hole was here and pre-drilled by RANS, the pass-through is not included. I bought mine from Aircraft Spruce. The interesting thing is the RANS holes were off by just a bit, so I had to re-drill. And then I ordered some 3/16 or AN3 nuts, bolts, and washers to put all the wires for the firewall. That pass-through kit also came with some heat shield material that I guess you'll wrap around and when you finish. And then here I bought some 3/16 or AN3s in different lengths, washers, nuts. My next step is I've placed this tray where its final resting place is going to be. Then I went underneath and I marked and outlined the frame cage on the tray table just so that when I drill, I don't drill into one of the bars. Then I placed the Avionics in place and marked the holes where they're going to go. I'm going to take the tray out and drill it and make sure the holes don't conflict with the bars underneath. My attachment technique, I think I'm going to use nut plates because I have to imagine that this is all covered up and painted, that the only way to access this is going to be through opening the panel, getting your arm up here, and if you can get a screwdriver, I imagine you can unscrew this from nut plates. I'm also going to check some videos and see if there's a better thought process on that. But that's my next step. Okay, I've done two things. I've laid out all these Avionics on the shelf in a pattern that I think will work. My goal was to make sure the connections were easily accessible and that I'm going to use nut plates, so if the panel is out, in theory, with a small screwdriver, remember you're going to have a cowl here, that you can get in there and undo these with a small screwdriver. So I shot for accessibility and also had to make sure that they weren't going to conflict with the caging. And then I use C-clamps. Right now they're just kind of temporarily in there. I use C-clamps that I ordered from Aircraft Spruce. These are 1/2-inch clamps, and there's some larger bars under here that are 5/8, but most of these are 1/2-inch. And I secured the shelf plate using the C-clamps. So let me show you what my plan is for my ground bus. I actually am going to do 2 ground buses. This is the larger of 2. One of them is going to go up underneath. I want it accessible. I've seen some people place it back here on the firewall, but if you've got a ground problem, you're never going to find it back behind the panel and get access to it. So I'm going to mount this one under here somewhere, and then I'm going to do a pass-through bolt on the firewall, which will come out and then attach to my frame. And I'll show you what I'm doing for my pass-through bolt. So that's one ground bus. The other ground bus I've put on my battery box, and this will handle all the grounds for the wing lights, pitot heater, and everything aft of the seats. And this will keep me from having to run grounds all the way up to the front. And it's also accessible by the battery hatch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach an 8-gauge ground wire from the negative over here. And to do that, I purchased some 8-gauge battery wire and some 5/16 battery buses or crimps. And then I'm using my hammer crimper and crimping on these. I'm also dripping some, after I get it crimped, I'm heating up the end fairly significantly and then dripping some solder down into the connection to give it a little more firm connection. And then I'm going to double wrap these with heat shrink. And that 8-gauge is what I'm reading should satisfy for ground bus. And I'll do this on the rear one back here, as I just showed. And then, for the front bus, I'm going to run this pass-through bolt. This is a 5/16 stainless steel bolt. And rather than buy a bar or rod of 5/16, what I did is I bought a stainless steel screw 2 inches long and just cut the head off. And these are all stainless steel nuts and washers. So this will pinch, and I'll use some Loctite on here. So this will go through my my firewall, and one side will attach to the ground bus with an 8-gauge, and the other side will attach to the engine mount with an 8-gauge. And that should give me my two ground buses. I decided to mount the ground bus on the right side underneath the shelf, and then I installed a ground bolt or ground rod to go through the firewall using an 8-gauge ground wire to come back to the bus. And as you come through the firewall, you see I've got that bolt coming through, all stainless steel. And then I've got an 8-gauge connector that I haven't terminated yet because I'm not exactly sure where it's going to mount, so I'm just leaving that unterminated, uncut for right now. Then I also created a 12-gauge grounding wire, which will attach to the bus underneath, and then come up and attach to this ground cable that the panel company provided. And I'm going to mount that ground cable on top of the shelf, and again for access from the front, but then wrap the ground around and just hook it up to the bus. Well, that's a pretty good place to end this video. That section of the build took me 28.2 hours, and that brings my project to date build hours 865.8. I thought I had it memorized. 865.8 hours to date. So moving right along, I've got enough content for another video, but for now I'm happy with where I'm going with this, and I was a little flustered, a little overwhelmed by some of the new learnings and the concerns about not really having much of a manual at this point. It's really what you can research and figure out. I would like to comment that feel free to comment. This is my first time build. A lot of this I'm just kind of making up as I go, researching it, figuring it out. If you see things that you want to make comments on, that's what this channel is all about, so I welcome that. And with that, dream it, just build it.